Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next mysteries, macabre stories, and accounts that defy logic. We want to know from you, where are you watching us from? The morning mist enveloped the vast estate of Sarah Winchester, heiress to the Winchester fortune in San Jose, California. The mansion stood like a living labyrinth, a jumble of towers, staircases that led nowhere, and doors that opened onto solid walls. Each corridor seemed to whisper secrets of a tortured past, and with each step, the heavy air reminded her that this place was not simply a house, it was a reflection of its owner's mind. Sarah, a middle-aged woman marked by grief and obsession, walked silently through the main hall, her fingers brushing against the ornate moldings that decorated the walls. Her ever-alert eyes searched for patterns and meaning in every detail. A misaligned door, a staircase that ended abruptly. To the outside world, the mansion was a monument to wealth. To Sarah, it was a fortress against unseen forces she believed were pursuing her. Since the tragedy of her husband and daughter's death had struck her, she had become a kind of prisoner of her own guilt, and each wall built seemed a desperate gesture to keep restless spirits at bay. On the other side of the human spectrum, John Thompson, a young reporter for a sensationalist San Francisco newspaper, had been sent to investigate rumors about the strangeness of that mansion. Ambitious, curious, and somewhat skeptical, John didn't believe in ghosts or curses. To him, Sarah was just another eccentric millionaire, and her domestic labyrinth, a story opportunity that could bring him notoriety. Wearing his dark overcoat, he approached the main entrance, observing the wild garden, where shrubs grew chaotically, as if reflecting the interior of the house. As he crossed the gate, a sudden chill ran down his spine. There was something in the atmosphere that couldn't be explained by just the icy morning wind. The tall windows reflected the overcast sky, but some seemed to absorb the light, casting shadows that moved strangely. John hesitated, but his journalist's instinct pushed him forward. Each step echoed as if the corridors were watching him, and without even realizing it, he was beginning to feel a presence that defied logic. Sarah, hearing the knock on the front door, went to the entrance with silent steps, almost floating. She observed the male figure with penetrating eyes, assessing whether John was merely curious or if he represented a threat. Without a gesture, she invited him in, leading him through corridors that seemed to have been built without any rationality. Stairs rising towards the ceiling, doors locked with keys that didn't seem to correspond to anything. The tension was palpable. Every sound echoed in a distorted way, and the feeling of unease increased with each passing moment. The antagonism between Sarah and John was immediate. She saw him as an intruder, someone who could expose her obsession and disprove her efforts to keep spirits at bay. John, in turn, saw in Sarah a tragic and fascinating figure, a woman trapped in her own construct of fear and superstition. The interaction between the two began with formal courtesy, but the discomfort grew as John explored the corridors, raising questions that Sarah tried to avoid. Each of her answers carried ambiguity, leaving room for doubt and for the fear subtly installed in the atmosphere. One of John's first discoveries was a staircase that went up only to disappear into the ceiling, leading to a small, empty attic. He bent down to look, surprised by the illogical architecture. Sarah watched closely, noticing the mixture of skepticism and fascination in his gaze. There was a fragile balance there. She needed him to understand her own story, but she feared that her words would be recorded and judged by the outside world. As they walked through corridors that led nowhere, John began to notice disturbing details. Dusty furniture, books open to specific pages, typewritten letters with strange instructions. The sense of mystery wasn't just psychological. There was concrete evidence of obsessive behavior bordering on the supernatural. Sarah, aware of his every move, remained enigmatic, leaving subtle clues about her belief that the spirits of the Winchester family were still present, that their constructions weren't mere extravagances, but barriers to protect themselves from an unseen evil. The atmosphere inside the mansion oscillated between the mundane and the surreal. Each of John's steps revealed more about Sarah's psyche, while each of her decisions to conduct or impede his investigations increased the tension. The opposition between the reporter's rationality and the heiress's obsession created a palpable conflict, reinforced by the labyrinth itself, which functioned as a living metaphor for their minds. He trying to find meaning, she trying to impose order on the chaos. In the center of the mansion, a spacious hall displayed family portraits and carefully positioned furniture. There, John realized that the architecture was not only strange, but intentionally chaotic. Each corridor and each door reflected a strategy, perhaps unconscious, for maintaining power over an invisible world. And in that instant, they both realized that the Winchester mansion was not just a house. It was a stage for obsessions, fears, and mysteries that were only beginning to reveal themselves. The day progressed slowly in the Winchester mansion, and the light filtering through the tall windows cast shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. Each room, corridor, and staircase held an untold story, and John, now more observant, began to realize that the house was much more than an eccentric building. It was a pulsating organism created to reflect fears, memories, and obsessions. Sarah led him down a corridor lined with doors that opened onto solid walls, a strategy, she said, to confuse the spirits. Each wall was draped with antique tapestries, filled with subtle symbols and geometric patterns that seemed to conceal hidden meanings. She explained bluntly that each modification to the house corresponded to a ritual or precaution, a silent gesture to protect herself from the presences that haunted her. Though she spoke calmly, there was a restless glint in her eyes, a certainty that every detail held vital importance. John's journalism was driven by curiosity, but gradually he began to sense something beyond logic. Small occurrences, doors creaking on their own, imperceptible whispers, footsteps on the wooden floor when no one was present, provoked a growing unease. He began mentally noting patterns and repetitions, trying to separate plausible explanations from the inexplicable. Each room visited seemed to carry its own energy, and the mansion, with its labyrinthine dimensions, seemed designed to amplify the emotional tension of those who entered it. Among the corridors, secondary characters emerged, adding layers to Sarah's world. There was Martha, the housekeeper with a firm voice and attentive gaze, who seemed to know every corner of the house and every habit of her mistress. Martha didn't speak of Sarah's past, but the glances exchanged with John revealed that there were secrets that not even the heiress dared mention. There was also Thomas, the silent gardener, whose eyes reflected both fear and respect. He knew every tree, every path in the wild garden, and maintained an almost religious devotion to the order of the place, even without fully understanding Sarah's obsessions. While exploring the garden, John began to realize how the outside environment influenced the owner's psychology. Overgrown bushes and twisted trees created shadows that resembled human figures, intensifying the atmosphere of paranoia. Sarah revealed details about the origin of some plants. Many had been chosen for their spiritual or medicinal associations, each an attempt to keep invisible forces at bay. For John, this was fascinating. Sarah's obsession was tangible and logical within her own belief system, even if it seemed irrational to the outside world. The culture and history of the United States, especially from the 19th and early 20th centuries, permeated the mansion. Victorian furniture, doors carved with hidden symbolism, and family heirlooms displayed not only wealth, but also traditions and superstitions imported from Europe and adapted to the New World. Every detail seemed to tell a silent story of fear, power, and grief, and John felt that understanding the mansion required more than just observation. It required sensitivity to perceive what was hidden, yet still present. Sarah gradually shared fragments of her past. Grief over the death of her husband and daughter was the driving force behind her obsession, but also a catalyst for her intelligence and determination. She wasn't just a frightened woman. She was someone who transformed pain into action, building physical and symbolic barriers against the unknown. Every corridor, staircase, and doorway, though chaotic, had an internal logic, a logic that John began to recognize as he followed her. The antagonism between the two deepened in this environment. John felt the need to understand, question, and record, while Sarah needed to maintain control, protect secrets, and cope with the growing feeling that her sanity was being observed and evaluated. There was tension in their interactions, but also tacit respect. She for her intimate knowledge of the mansion, he for his ability to analyze and interpret patterns that went unnoticed by most. As day turned to twilight, the mansion changed with the light. Shadows lengthened, corridors visually narrowed, and the sounds of the wind through the outer trees mingled with the creaking of doors and the echo of footsteps. John realized that the house was not merely a setting, but an active character in the narrative. It shaped emotions, induced decisions, and tested the physical and mental limits of those who dared to cross its corridors. In this context, the narrative is enriched. Sarah as the guardian of secrets, John as the intrepid observer, and the mansion itself as an almost living force, an extension of the fear, guilt, and obsession that defined the protagonist. The macabre tension intensifies. The inner world of each character is reflected in their physical and psychological choices, and every gesture, every look, every object carries multiple meanings. The silence in the Winchester mansion was now almost unbearable. John felt the tension increase with each corridor he walked down, as if the house breathed along with his footsteps. Sarah, watching him from a distance, knew that her presence there was both a threat and an opportunity to confront the outside world with the secrets she had kept hidden for decades. She began to test limits. Doors that had previously seemed to lead to ordinary rooms were now locked with non-existent locks. Staircases rose abruptly to the ceiling, and steps dissipated into thin air, creating a sensation of controlled vertigo. John realized it wasn't just eccentric architecture. Every change had an intention. He tried to rationalize Sarah's behavior, but each physical obstacle reflected a psychological barrier, a challenge that revealed layers of trauma and obsession. With each attempt to open a door or climb a staircase, John felt a growing tension. The mansion seemed to react to his presence, testing his courage and determination. Meanwhile, Sarah intensified her control over the environment. She introduced tasks that mixed logic and superstition, instructions to follow specific paths, touch objects in a certain order, light candles in precise places. Any deviation resulted in unexpected sounds, creaking doors, footsteps in empty hallways, whispers that seemed to form incomplete words. For John, the line between reality and perception began to blur, and initial disbelief gave way to genuine unease. Suddenly, a series of unexpected events occurred. A door that John believed to be merely decorative fell with a bang, revealing a hidden room filled with letters, diaries, and old documents. The yellowed pages contained detailed instructions on the construction of the mansion, notes about spirits that supposedly haunted the property, and accounts of inexplicable phenomena experienced by employees from decades past. Each discovery deepened the mystery and increased the risk of Sarah losing control over what she had kept hidden. At the same time, interpersonal obstacles arose that further complicated the situation. Martha, the housekeeper, began to show signs of unusual nervousness, looking at John with suspicion and at times retreating to hidden rooms as if she wanted to protect something. Thomas, the gardener, showed reluctance to allow John to approach certain outdoor areas, especially carefully chosen and positioned bushes and trees. Each interaction revealed unspoken secrets, clues that increased the tension and indicated that the secondary characters had their own motivations, some linked to fears, others to silent loyalty to Sarah. As they walked down a narrow hallway, John stumbled upon a staircase that seemed solid, but which creaked alarmingly under his weight. Sarah approached quickly, her eyes burning with a mixture of concern and reproach. "Some things shouldn't be touched," she said coldly. But John's curiosity was stronger. He began to question the logic of the constructions, to search for patterns in the seemingly chaotic rooms, and to mentally record every detail, even as the house seemed to try to push him away. The psychological tension reached its peak when John found a family portrait depicting deceased members of the Winchester family. Looking at the painted faces, he felt a chill. Some gazes seemed alive, as if following his every move. Sarah noticed his discomfort and explained without going into detail that the house reflected the presence of those who had passed away. Each portrait, each object, was a link between the world of the living and the world of the dead. The conflict wasn't just physical or architectural, it was spiritual, emotional, and psychological. On a particularly foggy night, the mansion revealed its most dangerous side. John, exploring a side corridor, heard footsteps behind him and turning around found no one. A sudden gust of wind extinguished the candles illuminating the path, and doors slammed shut simultaneously, isolating him in an unfamiliar room. The feeling of claustrophobia, combined with the fear of the inexplicable, heightened the tension of the central conflict. John's rationality against Sarah's obsessive control and beliefs, amplified by the very architecture that defied logic. The antagonism between them reached multiple layers. Sarah's obsession with protecting herself and keeping the house's secrets, John's curiosity that threatened to expose these mysteries, and the mansion itself, which functioned as a third character, imposing unexpected limits and challenges. Each scene built upon the previous one, revealing not only the dynamic between the protagonists, but also how the secondary characters and the environment shaped and intensified the conflict. The critical point emerged from the understanding that the mansion was not only a physical labyrinth, but also a psychological one. John needed to decipher patterns, interpret symbols, and navigate spaces that defied both gravity and logic, while Sarah struggled to maintain her sanity and keep her secrets intact. New obstacles constantly arose, doors that locked themselves without keys, corridors that shifted position, indistinct voices echoing through the mansion. Each challenge not only tested John's courage, but deepened his understanding of Sarah's complexity and the almost supernatural nature of the place. With each step, John became part of the story the house told, an intruder in a labyrinth of obsessions, fears, and ancestral secrets. Sarah, observing his reactions, realized that the conflict had reached a point where the past, the present, and the mansion intertwined, and that any movement could trigger unexpected consequences. The macabre atmosphere was not only visual but also psychological. The tension grew with each passing moment, and the unfolding conflict transformed the setting into something alive, unpredictable, and irresistibly terrifying. As the night fog enveloped the Winchester mansion, John and Sarah's story began to intertwine with subplots that added tension and complexity to the narrative. John's investigative journalism was not merely a confrontation with Sarah's obsession. It was also a dive into deeper layers of the family's past, of employees, and of visitors who had crossed that enigmatic property over the years. One of the first subplots came with Martha, the housekeeper. During one of the nights she accompanied John through the corridors, she confided in a low voice that many letters and diaries found there narrated stories of former employees who had mysteriously disappeared. Some accounts indicated that certain areas of the house were off-limits, not out of superstition, but because they held memories of unresolved tragedies. Martha showed genuine fear, and John realized that her loyalty was not only to Sarah, but to the very history of the mansion. Every gesture of hers, every hesitation in opening doors or touching objects, added tension and depth to the narrative. Meanwhile, Thomas, the gardener, became more than a silent observer. He led John to a section of the garden that seemed innocuous at first glance, but which concealed small plaques with ancient inscriptions and symbols reflecting beliefs and rituals brought by European immigrants. Thomas revealed that these symbols were used by Sarah to protect the home, but also served as warnings to anyone who dared to cross certain boundaries. This revelation added layers of complexity. The outside world, with its logic and curiosity, clashed with belief systems sustained by tradition, fear, and a need for control. A third subplot involved the mansion itself. The house wasn't static. Corridors seemed to shift position at night, doors would open or close for no apparent reason, and objects would move inexplicably. John began documenting patterns. Certain corridors became inaccessible at specific times, while others led to previously hidden rooms. Each discovery provoked increasing tension, a feeling that the house possessed a will of its own. The mansion functioned as an active secondary character, manipulating events and challenging the protagonists to react unpredictably. While exploring these layers, John began to perceive internal conflicts that were reflected in interpersonal relationships. Sarah's obsession with spirits and the need to keep the mansion under control generated frustrations and isolated those who worked there. Martha felt trapped between loyalty and fear, Thomas between devotion and the need for freedom, and John between journalistic curiosity and emotional survival. Each subplot reinforced the tension of the main conflict and amplified the psychological complexity of the story. Time pressure also came into play. John needed to gather information before the fog and darkness created even greater obstacles. Each night intensified the macabre atmosphere. Shadows that moved without explanation, wind currents that seemed to guide or divert the protagonist's steps, and strange noises coming from seemingly empty rooms. The urgency increased the narrative tension, showing how time was an element that not only structured the story, but also amplified the danger and unpredictability of the environment. The development of relationships was also a crucial point. John began to notice small cracks in Sarah's armor, moments of vulnerability, hesitations, traces of humanity hidden behind the obsession. The subplots allowed these nuances to be explored without interrupting the central rhythm of the story. At the same time, Sarah used these interactions to test John, measure his persistence, and assess whether he could understand or betray the secrets of the mansion. One of the most impactful events of this phase involved the discovery of a secret room filled with old portraits, documents, and diaries that narrated stories of mysterious visits, disappearances, and unexplained phenomena. Each item carried clues about the past, establishing connections between secondary characters and the central conflict. John felt he was facing a complex web of interconnected secrets, fears, and obsessions. Sarah, observing his reaction, realized that the investigation could reveal more than she was willing to expose, further increasing the tension between them. The night was dense, and the fog seemed thicker than ever. John, exhausted but determined, explored a side corridor he had never noticed before. He carried his notebook and flashlight, feeling the weight of each step on the creaking wooden floor. Each corridor seemed to compress the space, and the whispers that were once almost imperceptible now echoed clearly. A shiver ran down his spine. He was about to discover something that would change everything. Upon opening a seemingly ordinary door, John found a room completely hidden from the rest of the house. In the center, there was a large table laden with letters, documents, and personal belongings. But what caught his attention was an unfamiliar family portrait, an old, weathered photograph showing Sarah not as the reclusive heiress, but alongside figures he recognized from diaries and letters, former builders of the mansion, experts in symbolism and occultism hired by her family. Shock overwhelmed him. Sarah was not merely an obsessed woman, she was at the center of a web of secrets carefully planned for generations. Sarah appeared silently, as if she had followed John's every step, though he hadn't heard her footsteps. "You found what you shouldn't have," she said, her voice firm but heavy with emotion. John looked up, surprised, and realized that the scale of the mystery went far beyond what he had imagined. It wasn't just about absurd walls and staircases that led nowhere. The entire mansion was a mechanism, a labyrinth designed to maintain control over forces that defied reason. Then the revelation reached its climax. Documents found by John showed that Sarah had continued building the mansion not only out of personal obsession, but also due to precise instructions left by ancestors, indicating locations where inexplicable occurrences had been recorded. Every door, every corridor, every staircase was strategic. Even more shocking, some of these instructions indicated that certain areas of the house held traces of dangerous phenomena, relics of occult experiences that could influence anyone who entered. John realized that, unknowingly, he had entered a territory that mixed architecture, superstition, and something he could not yet fully comprehend. At that moment, a metallic noise echoed through the hallway. Previously locked doors began to bang violently, windows burst open abruptly, and the biting wind brought an immediate sense of threat. John tried to remain calm, but Sarah, with a grave expression, explained that certain areas of the house should only be accessed with prior knowledge, as the environment reacted to the presence of intruders. The turning point wasn't just the physical discovery, it was the realization that he was now part of the mansion's own mystery, subject to the rules Sarah had obeyed for years. Tensions rose when one of the letters revealed that Sarah herself had suffered mental attacks and visions during the construction of certain wings. The ancestral instructions were not merely architectural, but psychological. They served to keep the minds of those inhabiting the house in constant alert. John understood that the corridors, staircases, and doors were instruments of emotional manipulation, not only for protection, but also for testing. The line between sanity and obsession, reality and illusion, was beginning to blur. A critical moment occurred when, examining an old diary, John read something that perplexed him. Records of the Winchester family's nightly encounters with people who claimed to feel supernatural presences. Some reported visions of spirits, others described voices, indicating actions to be taken. The turning point became clear. The mansion was not just a home, but an arena for experiences that crossed the boundaries between the natural and the supernatural. Sarah, aware that John had access to this knowledge, showed for the first time a vulnerability, a genuine fear that secrets would be exposed to the outside world. The revelation altered the dynamic between them. John, previously a curious observer, became an unwitting participant in a game that challenged logic, courage, and perception. Sarah, who maintained absolute control over the house and its rules, now faced the dilemma of protecting the mystery or allowing someone, even a skeptic, to witness the mansion's complexity. The tension between protection and revelation created an intense emotional conflict, dramatically increasing the narrative's unpredictability. As the night wore on, the mansion seemed to take on a life of its own. Staircases curved in impossibly awkward ways, doors appeared where none had existed before, and the wind carried whispers that formed incomplete words. John realized that any action could trigger unexpected events. The turning point not only revealed hidden secrets, but also transformed the conflict into something active. The mansion now reacted to his presence, his curiosity, and the emotional tension that was building between the protagonists. The shock of the revelation still lingered in the air as John took a few steps back, feeling the reality of the mansion distort around him. Each corridor seemed narrower, each shadow more menacing. The perception of the house itself as an active organism had completely changed the dynamic between him and Sarah. She, in turn, showed signs of tension she rarely displayed. Stiff shoulders, short breaths, eyes that darted rapidly, searching for any sign of danger or exposure of her secrets. The consequences of the turning point soon became apparent. Martha, the housekeeper, began acting with more evident nervousness, avoiding hallways and whispering warnings that John barely understood. Her loyalty was now ambivalent, protecting Sarah or assisting the intruder who threatened to reveal secrets she herself feared. Every gesture of hers carried subtext, and John realized that the tension was not limited to the mansion, but spread among the individuals who lived there, reinforcing the atmosphere of distrust and fear. Thomas, the gardener, reacted even more intensely. The pressure of the turning point stirred memories of instructions Sarah had given him about certain outdoor areas, and he began to take silent steps to restrict John's access to certain gardens and paths. His devotion to the order established by the heiress, coupled with the fear of inexplicable events, created small tensions that reinforced the feeling that the mansion was alive, protecting its secrets with human allies who followed their own rules. John, now aware that the house reacted to his every move, faced internal dilemmas. His journalistic curiosity clashed with the need for emotional and physical survival. Every door he opened, every corridor he explored, became a calculated risk. The architectural and psychological labyrinth imposed direct consequences on the actions of anyone who dared to challenge its limits. The conflict, previously concentrated between him and Sarah, now expanded. It was John versus the mansion, John versus the past and the family secrets, and John versus his own fears that arose in the face of the inexplicable. As they walked down a corridor that grew increasingly narrow, Sarah decided to confront John directly. Her voice, normally calm and controlled, carried an unprecedented urgency. "Every step you take here has consequences. Curiosity can cost you more than you imagine." The warning, though enigmatic, could not be ignored. John felt the physical and emotional tension increase. The turning point now shaped his decisions, forcing him to act cautiously but also courageously. The mansion itself seemed to amplify the consequences. Stairs that once ascended slowly now trembled under the weight of any movement. Doors slammed shut when touched. Gusts of wind suddenly arose, blowing out candles and creating shadows that contorted across the walls. The interaction between the environment and the characters showed how the turning point had triggered a series of chain reactions, not only physical, but psychological and emotional, reflecting fear, curiosity, and obsession. The emotional impact on Sarah also intensified. She realized that John's presence in the mansion was not just a physical invasion, but a direct challenge to the logic that had sustained her life after the loss of her family. The tension between protecting the secret and allowing someone to understand the magnitude of her actions increased. Every gesture of hers reflected vulnerability and control simultaneously. Moving furniture, locking doors, guiding the reporter. Everything was calculated but charged with emotion. John's reactions also evolved. He began to mentally record patterns of behavior, reactions from the environment, and signs that the mansion and its inhabitants responded to his presence. Each obstacle, each unexpected movement, reinforced the feeling that he was part of something bigger than he imagined. The awareness that the house and its secrets demanded respect and understanding transformed his role. From a mere curious observer, he became an active part of the narrative, subject to the consequences of each action. At the peak of this phase, an unexpected event reinforced the impact of the turning point. A secret door abruptly opened, revealing an unknown room, illuminated by flickering candles, containing antique objects, photographs and symbols that connected past and present. The space seemed to pulse with its own energy, and both Sarah and John felt the tension intensify. The consequences of the turning point manifested physically and psychologically. Both were now irrevocably linked to the secrets of the mansion, and any decision could trigger unpredictable results. After a night of discoveries and twists and turns, John felt something shift within him. The initial shock of the turning point had given way to a clearer understanding. Surviving the Winchester mansion depended not only on physical courage, but on the ability to decipher patterns, interpret signs, and react precisely to the unexpected. Each corridor that had previously made him apprehensive now became a test of attention and adaptability. His evolution was not only mental, it was emotional, as the constant tension forced him to confront fears he never imagined he possessed. Sarah watched silently. For the first time, the barrier of emotional distance she maintained began to give way. She realized that John was not just a curious intruder, but someone capable of understanding the purpose and weight of the mansion. Their relationship began to change. Distrust gave way to a form of tense collaboration. Each of John's decisions was now made with more confidence, but also with respect for the environment that seemed alive. Each step a measured action, each reaction calculated in the face of the unpredictable. John's growth manifested itself in the most subtle actions. He began to notice patterns that had previously gone unnoticed. Doors that creaked in different ways, drafts that indicated secret paths, shadows that suggested routes or warnings. The mansion, which had once seemed chaotic, began to reveal its internal logic, and John learned to anticipate challenges. Adaptation became a vital survival tool. He couldn't change the house, but he could learn to navigate it. While exploring a particularly unstable corridor, John found a series of old diaries detailing past experiences of visitors and employees. Reading about the fears, failures, and strategies of those who had attempted to confront the mansion's mysteries, he began to understand that overcoming them required a balance between courage and prudence. Each entry was a lesson. To move forward, it was necessary to respect the house's history and understand its implicit rules. John absorbed these lessons, integrating knowledge and experience into his own approach. Emotional growth was also evident in his relationship with Sarah. Moments of tension gave way to more strategic, short dialogues, but laden with subtext. They began to communicate with glances, gestures, and subtle instructions, forming an unstable but functional partnership. John learned to read warning signs, anticipate movements, and act without needing lengthy verbal explanations. This growth not only strengthened his position, but also deepened the complexity of the narrative. The characters were now united by a shared tension and a mutual understanding of the dangers. The constant pressure of the mansion accelerated John's transformation process. He stopped reacting solely to fear. He began to make proactive decisions, seeking creative solutions to obstacles that seemed insurmountable. Moving staircases, disappearing doors, and shifting corridors became challenges to be deciphered, not mere dangers to be avoided. Each overcoming increased his confidence and shaped his perception. The mansion was not just an enemy, but an enigma that could be interpreted and manipulated. Sarah was also facing her own growth. The need to keep the mansion safe and its secrets protected now clashed with the possibility of sharing responsibility. She began to trust John in a calculated way, allowing him to actively participate in decisions, even if in a limited capacity. This change not only brought the protagonists closer, but also introduced new power dynamics. Sarah's obsession began to give way to strategic cooperation. The pinnacle of his overcoming adversity occurred when John managed to access a previously blocked wing of the mansion, using knowledge acquired from patterns, symbols, and ancient accounts. He traversed seemingly impossible corridors, climbed staircases that curved in disconcerting ways, and opened doors that responded only to precise gestures. Each step was a demonstration of skill, perception, and courage. The experience not only reinforced his progress, but also highlighted the macabre depth of the mansion, challenges that tested body, mind, and nerves, transforming each success into a tangible achievement. The narrative tension remained intense. Each of John's victories was accompanied by uncertainty, as he knew that any carelessness could lead to unpredictable consequences. The protagonist's growth doesn't eliminate the danger, but it makes him capable of facing it in a more strategic, rational, and daring way. The mansion continues to be an active force, reacting to every action, but now John is no longer a mere visitor. He becomes a conscious participant, capable of influencing the unfolding of the story. The Winchester mansion seemed to breathe with its own intensity. Every narrow corridor, every unsteady staircase, and every door that moved unexpectedly became a challenge of perception and courage. John, now more confident and attentive to the house's patterns, sensed that something big was about to happen. The atmosphere seemed to pulse with expectation, and the fog that seeped through the broken windows created shadows that danced in an almost menacing way. The preparation for the climax was underway, not only physical, but emotional and psychological. The secondary subplots began to resolve themselves, or at least to move towards their conclusions. Martha, the housekeeper, finally confronted her fears and helped John understand crucial details of the mansion, secret passages, hidden symbols, and records that had been omitted. Her tension transformed into strategic action. She became a silent ally, discreetly guiding John without undermining Sarah's authority. The relationship between the secondary characters and the protagonist was now aligned to face the decisive event that was approaching. Thomas, the gardener, also positioned himself clearly. The outdoor areas, previously taboo, were revealed as zones of observation and testing, with elements that indicated paths or psychological traps. His silent collaboration allowed John to anticipate movements, adjust strategies, and understand the extent of Sarah's control over the property. Each of their actions consolidated the tension, preparing the ground for the climax to reach maximum intensity. While exploring the West Wing, John and Sarah found rooms that combined elements of the past and present, portraits that seemed to follow their every movement, objects that reacted to touch, and diaries that recorded supernatural events. These elements acted as constant reminders that the climax would not only be a physical confrontation, but a clash of psychological, emotional, and perhaps even supernatural forces. The mansion remained alive, imposing rules and challenges that shaped each step of the protagonists. The narrative pace quickened as the tension increased. Corridors that once seemed predictable now transformed into nearly impossible labyrinths, and the sound of the wind seemed to carry whispers of warning. John, noticing patterns and signs that had previously gone unnoticed, began to anticipate changes in the architecture and obstacles. Each decision he made reflected not only courage, but strategic intelligence, demonstrating his growth and preparing him to face the narrative's climax. Sarah, aware of John's evolution, adjusted her own actions. She could no longer maintain absolute control without facing resistance. Collaboration, however reluctant, had become inevitable. Her authority blended with the need for cooperation, creating intense emotional tension. She began to lead John through strategic corridors, offering subtle clues, but without fully revealing the mansion's secrets. This interaction heightened the suspense and created an atmosphere of tense complicity, preparing them both for the final confrontation. As they progressed, the mansion's past became inescapably present. Ancient documents, symbols, and objects seemed to come alive, reacting to the protagonist's presence. John began to understand that every detail of the house had a purpose: to test limits, reveal weaknesses, and prepare those who dared to confront the heart of the mystery. The preparation for the climax was not merely physical, but a complete immersion in the psychological and emotional labyrinth of the story. Time pressure also contributed to the increasing pace. The fog made every move risky, and unexpected sounds, doors slamming, footsteps echoing, almost intelligible whispers, heavier the anxiety. Each obstacle overcome made the next challenges more complex, keeping the reader in constant suspense. The climax was not an isolated event, but the culmination of a sequence of decisions, strategies, and psychological confrontations that intensified throughout the narrative. Before the final confrontation, John and Sarah reached a symbolic point of convergence, a central room in the mansion, surrounded by doors leading to corridors that had previously seemed impossible. There, past and present, reality and illusion intertwined. Each character, each subplot, and each element of the house came together, creating the perfect setting for the climax. The moment was imminent, and the tension reached its peak. The protagonists needed to act with precision, courage, and intelligence, for each decision could determine the final outcome of the story. The heart of the Winchester mansion pulsed with a force of its own. John and Sarah, now reluctant allies, moved through the central room that served as the core of the entire mystery. The walls seemed to breathe, and each door around them opened or closed with almost calculated precision. The environment transformed into a living labyrinth, ready to test the courage, intelligence, and emotional resilience of anyone who dared to challenge its secrets. John felt the tension rising to its limit. Every shadow seemed to hold hidden intentions, every sound carried a threat. He realized that it wasn't enough to simply react. He needed to anticipate, plan, and confront the mansion with strategy and instinct. The lessons from the subplots and the growth he had experienced were becoming vital. This was the moment when everything he had learned would be tested. Sarah, for her part, displayed vulnerability and authority simultaneously. The obsession that had kept her isolated gave way to the need for coordinated action. She led John through a series of doors that intertwined like gears in a gigantic mechanism. "Here, every step is crucial," she said, her voice firm but laden with urgency. Behind her controlled demeanor, John perceived that she too felt fear. Fear of losing control over the mansion's secrets, but also fear that John would fully understand them and expose the truth. Suddenly, the mansion reacted more intensely than ever before. Staircases turned abruptly, corridors lengthened, and doors appeared where none had existed before. A sharp gust of wind extinguished some candles, plunging the room into twilight. Antique objects fell from shelves, forming unpredictable obstacles. The climax was not merely psychological. The house itself became the antagonist, challenging every action of the protagonists. As they moved forward, John noticed a pattern. Certain symbols on the walls glowed faintly, indicating the correct path. Following them, he and Sarah arrived at a final, reinforced, enigmatic door, behind which an almost palpable energy seemed to pulse. John reached out, and a shiver ran down his spine. He felt the presence of everything the mansion had accumulated: secrets, obsessions, memories, and perhaps forces that defied logic. When the door opened, a circular room was revealed. In the center, a pedestal displayed an old diary, surrounded by candles that relit themselves, casting a flickering light on symbols that snaked across the floor. It was the epicenter of the mansion, the core of its power and mystery. Every object, every shadow, and every symbol there seemed laden with its own intention. John understood that this was the point where the central conflict would reach its climax. To control, understand, or succumb to the mansion. Sarah hesitated. For the first time, she allowed John to take an active role in the decision. "You need to choose, continue or retreat. There are no guarantees," she said. The emotional tension reached its peak. John took a deep breath, remembering the nights of exploration, the lessons learned, the subplots resolved, and the growth that had enabled him to face this. He moved forward with determination, aware that each step could trigger unexpected consequences. Upon opening the diary, a twist was revealed. The instructions contained within not only detailed the secrets of the mansion, but also revealed that Sarah was not solely responsible for the labyrinth of obsessions. Predecessors of the family had left mechanisms to test any intruder, including John. The house had allowed his entry precisely to put his courage, intelligence, and emotional resilience to the test. The true revelation: John not only discovered secrets, but became part of the mansion's destiny as an active and transformative participant. As he processed the information, the mansion reacted. Doors slammed shut, hallways shifted, and candles cast shadows that seemed to form human figures in warning gestures. John and Sarah exchanged glances. For the first time, there was a shared tension, a mutual understanding that only together could they conclude this chapter. With precision and courage, John followed subtle instructions from the diary, manipulating objects and activating mechanisms that unlocked secret passages. Each movement was a test. A mistake could mean physical or psychological traps. The mansion, until then antagonistic, began to reveal itself as part of a system of trials that tested both mind and character. Finally, as they completed the last steps, the tension momentarily dissipated. The atmosphere stabilized, doors and corridors aligned, and the central room fell silent, except for the echo of their breathing. John had overcome the challenge, and the mansion, in silence, seemed to acknowledge his achievement. The protagonist's transformation was complete. He was no longer just a curious observer. Now he was someone capable of deciphering, reacting to, and surviving the macabre complexity of Winchester. Sarah, visibly relieved, gave her first genuine smile in years. For the first time, obsession gave way to cooperation, and both realized that the central conflict, control, secrecy, and the psychological tension of the mansion had reached an unexpected and surprising resolution. The mansion remained mysterious, but John and Sarah now possessed understanding, respect, and mastery over its enigma. The silence that followed the climax seemed heavier than any sound ever heard in the Winchester mansion. Corridors that had once creaked and whispered now stood still, as if the house itself recognized that its test had come to an end. John and Sarah remained in the central room, breathing deeply, aware that they had traversed not only a physical labyrinth, but an intricate maze of secrets, obsessions, and forces that defy logic. The consequences of the choices made during the climax began to unfold. Martha and Thomas, previously tense and reluctant, showed genuine relief. The tension that permeated every interaction began to dissolve, and a sense of order, albeit unstable, returned to the mansion. The obstacles that had previously seemed insurmountable now revealed themselves to have been tests. The mansion, in its complex and macabre architecture, had functioned as a testing ground, filtering out those capable of understanding and respecting its mysteries. Sarah, for the first time in years, relaxed. The obsession that had isolated her had transformed into an awareness of the balance between control and trust. She realized that allowing John to participate actively not only saved her own sanity, but also brought to light the true function of the mansion: to protect the family legacy and preserve secrets that, although macabre, possessed historical and psychological value. Her rigid stance gave way to strategic collaboration, marking a significant personal evolution. John, on the other hand, understood the scope of his journey. He had not only documented and explored, but had also become part of a narrative that transcends simple explanations. His courage, perception, and adaptability transformed him from a mere observer into an active participant, capable of influencing the unfolding of events that defy reason. The experience marked him deeply, not only because of the terror and suspense, but also because of the personal growth that emerged from the direct confrontation with the unknown. The mansion, now seemingly at rest, retained its enigmatic character. The labyrinth of corridors, doors, and staircases continued to exist, but it had recognized John and Sarah's ability to navigate its challenges. The balance between the supernatural and the psychological remained intact, preserving the sense of mystery, but without preventing the protagonists from emerging transformed and victorious from their test. As they walked through the established corridors, John and Sarah shared a silent understanding. The house was not an enemy, nor a mere backdrop. It was an active protagonist, a force that demanded respect, observation, and courage. The suspense and macabre tension did not completely disappear, but had been transformed into learning, partnership, and an awareness of the power of secrets. The Winchester legacy remained untouched, but the protagonists carried with them the experience and knowledge that allowed them to decipher, respect, and survive what previously seemed impossible. The conclusion made it clear that the mystery of the mansion didn't need to be completely solved for the journey to be transformative. The true triumph lay in overcoming, understanding, and growing in the face of the macabre. Months later, the Winchester mansion remained silent, but his presence was felt in every shadow and corridor. John published his account, full of suspense and details that few would dare to confirm, carrying with him the certainty that he had survived something beyond common comprehension. Sarah, now more cautious and aware of her legacy, continued to protect the house, but with a strategic openness she had never had before. The mansion remained an enigma, and those who knew it knew. Not all secrets had been revealed. Some mysteries would continue to echo, awaiting new courageous visitors. If you were intrigued by the macabre secrets of the Winchester mansion and John and Sarah's intense journey, share this story with anyone who enjoys mysteries and suspense. Comment on your theories about the events that remain hidden and tell us which part gave you the most chills. Subscribe to the channel to follow new stories that defy logic and explore the unknown, where every corridor hides an enigma and every shadow carries a secret. Don't miss the upcoming tales that test courage, perception, and resilience, keeping you on the edge of your seat with each chapter.